Very next thing that I want to talk about is something that people generally find difficult to talk about, men, women, children alike, and it is trauma, right? But I see that it is more difficult for guys to talk about these things because they do not want to be perceived as weak in a certain sense. And now the things that I really want to point out when I speak about trauma, because you could get trauma from, you could be traumatized from any event, but the things that I really want you to talk about are rape, child abuse, and let's start with rape. Let's start with rape. Yeah, let's start with rape.
Well, I wouldn't know so much about this one because I never been a victim, but from their stories and from a guy's perspective, I can share or I can be able to tell you how bad it can be if a guy has been raped, especially by someone of the same sex. And it may not necessarily be rape, or I don't know, maybe what I'm going to describe is still classified as rape. Some people, like from stories from my classmates back in school, they talk about how when they were in junior school, they were made to do these things and they did not even realize that it was wrong and it was bad, and they did not realize that they should have reacted, and so they grow up and possibly their colleagues are talking about this thing and talking about how crazy it is, how creepy and how terrible it would be, the experience would be if such a thing should happen to them, and then you're there in the room and you've had this experience and then you realize that what happened to you was a really terrible thing, and you can't just come out in that scene, in that setting, while these guys are talking to say that, oh, okay, when I was in junior secondary school, I was made to do this by a senior, or this happened to me in so.
Another thing, I'm sorry, there's a question I have for you, but before I get to that, there's another thing that men talk about in a way that makes me feel like, I don't know, I have mixed feelings about it. So we hear about men who speak of how they were abused when they were younger, not in school, sometimes by family members, sometimes by mates, and we don't really know the effect that it has on them in the future because they pass it off as, oh, I was a lucky one, I started early, like that thing that you guys do. I started early, but if you could just tell us the effects, or the real effects, what men do not talk about, what you guys don't talk about when it comes to sexual abuse for men, for boys.
For young boys, the thing is, abuse is always abuse. There's hardly a positive side to it. Some of these guys who were abused when they were kids might grow up to actually be disgusted by anything that has to do with sex. Just seeing a woman naked might remind them of how that particular auntie or that maid used to always come into their room to take advantage of them, and it can just be it can have future effects on the person, when it's time for such a person to settle. They've lived their teenage life and it probably stopped. They lived their teenage life without that, and then they come to the point where they have to get married and they have to have sexual intercourse, and they're triggered by these memories. So
these things I feel like should be taken more seriously in society, honestly, because you might have a brother who says, oh, I started early and I had this maid who was always coming on to me, and he might pass it off as, I had a good time, but maybe we should try to sit with them and search deeper and see how it really affected them. Okay, so before we wrap this up, because this is very long and we can't finish today, I want to ask Mr. Femi just one last question. Mr. Femi, you know about PTSD?
Yeah.
Post-traumatic stress disorder. There is something, there's a friend we have in common.
Yeah.
who went through a robbery, who was a victim of a robbery. And when he tells that story to us, it is hilarious, you know. But I am sure that if someone sits with him, maybe you have, there are things that that incident have done to him that he probably will not be able to share. I just can't wrap my head around, why would you paint something so tragic, something so painful as hilarious? Why would you not talk about it?
It's really interesting that you mentioned this control, right? Because one may easily just pass it off as one of those hilarious events, but it isn't. See, I was talking about defending masculinity. See, we guys, we have been under so much societal pressure not to show vulnerability that we take every chance, to beef up our ego. All right. Now, I will come that way to actually answer your question. A guy will go through a traumatic experience such as robbery, but when he's explaining to his friend, because it's such a unique experience, however bad it is, he will pass it off as something that even if you were under that under the same circumstance, same situation, you will not do anything better. You start to hear something like, "Oh, mo lie down, go you, mo lie down, go. Oh, be a down, you understand? You have to hear that thing because he's trying to say, I've had a unique experience. Now I'm a bigger man than you are. Even if you find yourself in that kind of situation, you can't do anything better. Alright, so we pass off unique experiences like that as another means to brag about our masculinity. See, every guy, because of the societal pressure, wants to always, push that narrative out there that I'm a man now. Okay, whether it's through through experience or through means or improved capacity, you always want to put it out there that, see, if you have gone through something like this, you're a man.
Very true.
And that is terrible and hilarious at the same time. So, okay, we do not have the luxury of time, but on the very next episode, Mr. Femi and Mr. Victor, thank you so very much for being here today. Thank you so much for sharing with us. We will be having them on the very next episode as well. Watch out for the part 2 of this episode. Until then, I am your host, Omiya Omatara. See you in the very next episode. Bye.